It was 6:47 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning when a woman named Bethany Kensington Wright made a $2-3 million mistake that would send her to federal prison for 8 years. And it all started with a pair of bolt cutters and the wrong Jeep. The sound of metal snapping echoed through the peaceful suburb like gunfire. That sound marked the moment Bethany, the president of the neighborhood HOA, crossed a line she couldn't come back from. While I was thousands of miles away overseas on deployment, this self-appointed suburban queen decided my parked Jeep was an Isorand, needed to go. What she didn't know: that Jeep belonged to a federal drug task force and was packed with nearly $350,000 worth of sensitive surveillance equipment. My name is Marcus Tank Rodriguez. 3 months ago, I inherited my grandmother's home in Willowbrook Estates. A place that looks perfect from the outside, but underneath, it's a breeding ground for entitlement and fake authority. HOA dues were $150 a month, supposedly for community standards. In reality, it meant giving power to someone like Bethany, who loved controlling people's lives. I'm in the Army Reserve, and I'd just joined a federal task force. The house was supposed to be a blessing. I planned to rent it while I was away, build equity, and honor the woman who raised me after my parents died. That house still smelled like her tortillas and cinnamon candles. Every creaky floorboard was a memory. "Mijo," she'd say, "you stand up to bullies, but do it the right way." Bethany Wright was the kind of person who measured grass with a ruler and fined people for leaving Christmas lights up too long. Her husband, Carl, sat on the city council. That made her feel invincible. She thought she was above everyone else and no one dared challenge her. 2 weeks after my deployment started, I got an email, a violation notice. Apparently, my federal Jeep was a commercial vehicle, not allowed in residential driveways. Never mind the fact that it had clear government plates and decals. She claimed it violated HOA rules. What Bethany didn't realize was that the Jeep contained highly classified federal equipment: GPS trackers, encrypted radios, and hidden cameras. This wasn't some regular SUV. Moving it without proper authorization was a federal crime. The fines started adding up: $50 per day. Meanwhile, I was getting shot at overseas. My sister, Maya, a middle school teacher, tried reasoning with her. She explained I was deployed, showed my orders, even offered to put a tarp over the Jeep. But Bethany wasn't having it. She looked at Maya like she was nothing and said, "If your brother can't follow the rules, maybe your family doesn't belong here." Maya called me crying. She said Bethany threatened to put a lien on the house and told her Carl had connections at the school board that supporting me could jeopardize Maya's job. That's when the truth started to unravel. Turns out, Maya wasn't the only one targeted. The Johnson Ziza Marine got fined for a loud motorcycle. Sarah Martinez, whose husband is Navy, got penalized for having unprofessional garden gnomes. Every military family in that neighborhood was getting harassed, and Bethany wasn't just misinterpreting the rules, she was making them up. The original HOA bylaws from 1987 clearly stated that military and emergency vehicles were exempt from these restrictions. She was counting on people being too afraid or too uninformed to challenge her. The entire neighborhood lived in fear. People whispered over fences but didn't dare speak publicly. Bethany had built her own little empire, protected by Carl's political ties. That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with some HOA busybody. This was systematic harassment backed by political clout. That Jeep wasn't just mine, it was government property. And Bethany had no idea who she was messing with. Then came her next move. She sent a certified letter demanding the Jeep be removed within 24 hours or it would be towed. She claimed it was a health and safety risk. The letter looked official, even copied Carl's office and the local police. Total fiction, written to scare us. Maya called again, panic in her voice. She said a tow truck was circling the block, eyeing the Jeep like a prize. I could hear the fear in her voice. That's when I made my move. I called JAG, the military's legal arm. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams took one look at the case and went from calm to furious. She told me, "Rodriguez, this isn't an HOA violation, this is a felony." Most people don't know, but the Service Members Civil Relief Act protects deployed soldiers from harassment like this. And even more importantly, that Jeep belonged to the U.S. government. Tampering with it was a federal offense. Williams filed a complaint with Base Command, which triggered a federal review. And just like that, Bethany's little power trip was now under scrutiny by people with real authority. Then Maya found something buried deep in Grandma's old HOA paperwork: a letter. Bethany wrote in 2019 to the City Planning Commission. She argued against military housing assistance in the neighborhood because military families don't invest in long-term community values. Translation: she'd been working to keep military people out for years. Maya's hands were shaking as she read it. She realized that this wasn't just harassment, this was targeted discrimination against anyone in uniform. The hen fined for their kid's bike. The Washingtons cited for a crying baby. This was no accident. It was a campaign. Carl had a luxury condo project in the pipeline. He needed HOA approval for zoning changes. And military families with our deployment schedules and work vehicles didn't fit the image he wanted. Maya kicked into overdrive. She began reaching out to others who'd been targeted. She built a file. Every false violation, every threat, every manipulated rule. She was unknowingly building a discrimination case. Then Bethany made her final, fatal mistake. She showed up at our property, heels clicking on the driveway, measuring tape in hand. She started inspecting everything, taking photos of my Jeep, documenting every inch like she was on some police show. She told Maya, "Your brother's military service doesn't excuse non-compliance. Maybe this neighborhood isn't for your kind." That was it. I activated the Jeep surveillance features remotely. GPS logs, security footage, standard for drug task force vehicles. And what it showed: Bethany had been on our property 17 times in 3 days. She was photographing federal equipment without permission. That's not just harassment, that's borderline espionage. I forwarded everything to my task force supervisor, Captain Sarah Chen. Her response: "Rodriguez, how fast do you want me to make this woman's life complicated?" Bethany was about to meet the full force of the federal government. 3 days after our complaint was filed, she hired a private security company to patrol the neighborhood. 2 guards in a white SUV drove around, taking photos of my Jeep like it was some kind of threat. But it wasn't just the pictures, it was what they told the neighbors. Maya called me again, voice cracking. She said the guards were telling people I was dangerous, that military vehicles posed a safety risk. That was the final straw. Bethany Kensington Wright had declared war on the wrong soldier, and this time, the consequences weren't going to be a fine or a warning. They were going to come with handcuffs and a courtroom. Because she didn't just mess with my Jeep, she messed with the US government. And she was about to pay for it. Brenda didn't show her face for a few days after that meeting. Her perfectly trimmed hedges stayed untouched. Her usual morning patrol around the neighborhood, suspiciously absent. It was like the queen had retreated to her castle to lick her wounds. But silence doesn't mean surrender. That Thursday, a notice appeared on our front door, this time signed by the HOA board. They were officially launching an internal review into escalating tensions between a homeowner and the association leadership. Translation: Brenda was under investigation. And not just for the fence or the deck. I'd submitted everything: dates, times, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen her harassing Elena, even photos of the scratches on her car. By the weekend, the board sent out a neighborhood-wide letter acknowledging inconsistencies in enforcement. They promised a reassessment of leadership practices and encouraged residents to attend the next open meeting. That was the first time in years anyone had dared to publicly question Brenda's authority. The response: let's just say people had things to say. That next meeting was packed. People who'd never shown up before were suddenly very interested in HOA policies. Turns out, Brenda had a long history of selective enforcement. One guy brought a folder of his own. Brenda had fined him $200 for having non-native plants in his yard. Another woman said she was once threatened with legal action for her son's basketball hoop. Brenda sat at the front, stone-faced, while complaints poured in. When the floor opened up, Elena, calm and collected, still in her scrubs, from work, stood and spoke. "My husband and I bought this home together. I saved children's lives for a living. And I was treated like a criminal in my own driveway because I dared to move in." The room was dead quiet. You could hear the hum of the vending machine in the corner. People listened. And then they started nodding. Someone clapped. Then more people. And just like that, the tide turned. 2 weeks later, Brenda was officially removed as HOA president. The board voted 4-1. Her only supporter, a guy who lived next door to her and mysteriously had a freshly paved driveway every spring. But it didn't stop there. The board created a new Community Fairness Committee. They asked me to sit on it. Me, the guy Brenda tried to run out of the neighborhood. I didn't say yes right away. But when Alina and I walked through the neighborhood that Sunday, people waved. A couple even apologized. One neighbor who'd stayed silent during the worst of it brought us cookies and said, "We should have spoken up sooner." I agreed to serve on the committee, not to play hero, but to make sure no one else got pushed around like we did. Brenda. She still lives at the end of the cul-de-sac, but now she's just another resident. Her clipboard is gone. Her rule is over. The fence, she had to lower it. The deck, she paid a fine and finally filed the right permits. And Alina, she parks wherever she wants. No more fines. No more threats. Just peace and quiet, like it should have been all along. Sometimes, the strongest people aren't the loudest. They're the ones who quietly stand their ground. Like Alina, holding a box of nursing books while someone tried to tear her down. But the thing about bullies is they only win if you let them. And Brenda, she picked the wrong couple to mess with. Now, our house feels like a home again. Not because we want to fight, but because we refuse to lose ourselves in it. And if you're dealing with someone like Brenda in your own neighborhood, remember this. Learn the rules better than they do. Stay calm, document everything. And when the moment comes, don't yell. Just show up ready. Because the truth always makes more noise than their clipboard ever will. I seriously underestimated what Brenda was capable of after being humiliated in front of her neighbors. The next morning, on my way to work, I spotted a car I didn't recognize parked across the street. Inside was a man in a cheap suit, holding a camera. The morning sun glinted off his telephoto lens like a predator's eye catching the light. At lunch, Alina called me, her voice tight with anxiety. "Someone's taking pictures of our house," she whispered. I saw him from the bedroom window. The bitter taste in my coffee hit instantly. Brenda had actually hired a private investigator, probably hoping to dig up something, anything, to justify her harassment. The irony of it all. She was paying someone to make us look like criminals while she was the one violating the HOA rules. But this wasn't just a petty grudge anymore. Brenda was escalating. By Wednesday afternoon, Alina was called into her supervisor's office. At the hospital, harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone had filed a formal complaint accusing Alina of being mentally unstable and involved in community conflicts that compromised her judgment. Her supervisor who'd worked with her for 3 years laughed when she read it. "Whoever sent this clearly doesn't know you," she said. "But we still have to document it with HR." That night, the faint scent of lavender lotion filled our bedroom. Alina sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow from stress. "Maybe we should just move," she said quietly. "I can't let someone ruin my career over a driveway." And that's when it hit me. Brenda wasn't just trying to fine us, or shame us, she was trying to drive us out. This wasn't about rules, it was full-on psychological warfare. Thursday brought yet another twist, a visit from the city planning department. Another anonymous complaint, this time claiming we were violating zoning laws by operating a medical business from our home. The inspector was calm and patient, the kind of man who'd clearly dealt with this circus before. He looked at Elena's nursing bag and raised an eyebrow. "Unless you're doing surgery in the living room," he said dryly. "This isn't a zoning violation." That night, I knew we had to fight back, not with anger, but with precision. I called a property attorney I found online. Her name was Sarah Martinez. She sounded like someone who'd been through HOA wars before, and didn't scare easy when HOA enforcement becomes selective or retaliatory. She explained, "It opens the association up to legal liability. It's similar to hostile workplace harassment tonally in housing." She advised us to document everything. Every complaint, every interaction, every fine with timestamps and witnesses, if possible. Alina nodded along. It was the same methodical discipline she'd learned as a nurse, protecting herself by keeping records. Then Sarah dropped the real bomb. "You should request all financial records from the HOA for the past 3 years, she said. "Any member can ask. And if Brenda's been abusing power, odds are the paper trail will show it." The next morning, I filed a formal request for 3 years of budgets, expenditures, and vendor contracts. Standard stuff. But Brenda, she went ballistic. She called an emergency board meeting to talk about protecting sensitive HOA documents from harassment, right? That reaction told me everything I needed to know. Meanwhile, the investigator Brenda hired was still trailing Alana, getting sloppier by the day. Tuesday, he followed her to the grocery store. Wednesday, he was parked outside her hospital, puffing a cigarette in his running car. By Thursday, Alina had had enough. She marched right up to him, knocked on his window, and asked if he wanted her autograph since he was so obsessed with photographing her. His face turned crimson. He peeled off, clearly realizing that stalking a pediatric nurse didn't make him a super sleuth. As for Brenda's little neighborhood watch meetings, 4 people showed up, herself included. Tom Martinez, our next-door neighbor and a retired accountant, went just out of curiosity. Later, he told me, she spent the whole meeting complaining about your wife's car. Not one word about actual safety. But then Brenda made her biggest mistake yet. On Friday night, every resident got an email from the HOA. Brenda had unilaterally issued an $800 emergency assessment per household, citing security concerns from disruptive elements in the community. Translation: she wanted us all to pay for her surveillance crusade. She gave 30 days to pay or face liens on our properties. That night, my phone exploded. Quiet neighbors who'd stayed silent through all the drama were suddenly furious. No one likes surprise bills, especially ones that sound like revenge. Brenda had just made the entire neighborhood angry. Saturday morning arrived, crisp and quiet. I was hoping for a peaceful cup of coffee on the porch. Instead, Brenda was back-banging on our door at 6 a.m., phone in hand with 911 ready on the screen. "There's an illegal trespasser in this house," she shrieked, pacing like a trapped animal on our frosty front step. She pointed straight at Alina, who stood behind me in her scrubs, still wearing her hospital ID badge. "Brenda, she lives here. We've shown you the deed, the marriage certificate, everything." But reasoning with Brenda was like arguing with a storm. "I don't care what fake papers you have," she snapped. "No one moves in without my approval." The way she said this person made my blood boil. Officer Rodriguez arrived. Within minutes. He looked around, probably expecting domestic violence based on Brenda's call. Instead, he found 3 adults having a surreal argument in a driveway. I calmly handed over the documents. Marriage certificate, property deed, Elena's license. Rodriguez's face changed. He sighed. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Brenda, "this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. These people have every right to be here." Brenda didn't stop. She demanded, "Alina be arrested." Her voice got louder and shriller until it echoed like nails on a chalkboard. By now, the whole street was awake. Neighbors were emerging in pajamas and robes. Mrs. Patterson stood on her porch, shaking her head. Tom leaned against his fence with his coffee, watching like it was bad community theater. Even the Johnson kids paused their bikes to gawk at the HOA president, losing her mind on a cop. Rodriguez finally snapped. "Ma'am, if you file another false report, you will face charges." Brenda went silent. For once, she stormed off, huffing and muttering to herself. And just like that, the damage was done. She had humiliated herself and Alani on a public stage. The sympathy in our neighbors' eyes said it all. They weren't on her side anymore. That weekend, we turned our kitchen into a war room. Every inch of the table was covered in documents. Alina helped organize everything, treating the whole thing like a triage case. Her nurse instincts kicked in, methodical, precise. That's when we found it. Buried in the financial records Brenda had tried so hard to hide were a string of payments to Kensington Gardens LLC, landscaping work, supposedly, totaling $47,000 over 2 years. But here's the twist: Kensington is Brenda's last name and the business registered under her husband. There was no competitive bidding, no board approval for those contracts over $5,000, clear violations of the bylaws. No business license on file. No insurance either. Just Brenda funneling community money into her own family business. Most of the work wasn't even done. And the emergency landscaping services, completely made up. It meant every household had been overcharged by about $400 a year to fund Brenda's corruption. But the best part, Alina spotted something I missed. The biggest payments coincided with Brenda's worst acts of enforcement: fines, harassment, public shaming. It wasn't just theft, it was retaliation. And she was making us pay for it. That night, I called our attorney again. "You need to see this," I said, staring at the mountain of evidence spread across our kitchen like a crime scene. Alina stood beside me, hand on my shoulder, still carrying the faint scent of antiseptic from work. "She saves lives. Brenda steals from them." "What now?" she asked. "Now," I told her, "we show this neighborhood exactly who they've been, trusting with their money. We didn't go to the board. We didn't send a letter. We went straight to the people." Sunday afternoon, while Brenda was probably polishing her latest bogus violation letter, We went door to door with a simple folder. Inside were copies of the financial records showing $47,000 in fake contracts, the business registry for Kensington Gardens LLC, and a summary of the HOA bylaws Brenda had broken. The first stop was the Pattersons. They'd been here longer than anyone, quiet but sharp. Mr. Patterson flipped through the pages, eyes narrowing. She's been stealing our money this whole time. Next came the Johnsons. Their teenager, who'd seen Brenda yell at Alina at dawn, answered the door. "Yo, is this why she's always in everybody's business?" he said. We got played. By the time we reached the fifth house, word had already spread. People were waiting for us. Some had coffee, others had copies of their own complaint letters Brenda had ignored for years, requests for repairs, pest control, basic upkeep, all conveniently lost. While Brenda's husband got paid under the table for lawn work he never did. The neighborhood was awake now, furious, empowered, and by that evening, the group chat exploded. Someone leaked everything to the whole HOA in a mass email chain titled, "Where did our $47,000 go?" Attached were the documents we'd shared, along with Elena's carefully written summary. No ranting, no exaggeration. Just facts, figures, and a quiet question. If this is what she's done with your money, how much longer will we let her do it? The replies poured in like wildfire. We want an audit. I've been fined for parking while she's stealing from us. Remove her. Immediately. But Brenda didn't go down easy. Monday morning, she sent out an emergency, HOA-wide notice accusing us of defamation, claiming the documents had been doctored and that we were trying to destroy this community from within. It was laughable. No one bought it. Then she tried to ban Alina from attending HOA meetings, citing disruptive behavior. The same woman who screamed on our porch at 6 a.m. was calling Alina disruptive. But the final nail in her coffin came from the least expected place. Dom Martinez, the retired accountant next door. He'd been quietly reviewing every HOA record for the past 5 years on his own. He knocked on our door with a manila envelope and said, "You missed one." Inside were invoices from 2 years ago, $3,200 in event catering, paid to a business owned by Brenda's cousin. There had been no events, no food, just fake receipts. Tom had highlighted every illegal expense and noted where they violated HOA statutes. The whole packet was over 40 pages long. "This is embezzlement," he said flatly. We handed everything to Sarah, our attorney. She drafted a cease and desist letter for Brenda demanding she step down immediately or face civil and criminal action. But we weren't done. The next HOA meeting was packed. For the first time in years, every seat was filled. People stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes locked on Brenda as she tried to start the meeting like nothing had happened. Alina stood, calm, poised. She handed out copies of the evidence to everyone. Then she spoke, not with anger, but strength. "I'm not here to attack anyone," she said, "but the person enforcing our rules has been breaking them behind our backs. While you were being fined, she was funneling your money into her family's bank account. While you were silenced, she got louder. I won't be quiet about it anymore." A murmur of support rippled through the crowd. Brenda tried to interrupt, but the treasurer stood and said, "We've reviewed the finances. It's all true." Then Tom added, "This is a formal motion to remove Brenda Kensington from the HOA board for breach of fiduciary duty." The vote wasn't even close. 37-2. Brenda's face turned the color of spoiled wine. She stood up, sputtered something about ungrateful neighbors, grabbed her purse, and stormed out. The next day, a sign went up at the HOA bulletin board. HOA emergency meeting minutes. Brenda Kensington officially removed. Full audit in progress. But there was one more twist. 2 weeks later, Brenda was served by the county. Fraud. Investigation initiated. Alina and I had provided enough documentation to trigger a formal complaint. If convicted, Brenda could face fines, restitution, and possibly jail time. That night, Alina and I finally sat in peace on our porch. No shouting. No spy cars. Just quiet wind and the scent of rosemary from our flower beds. "You think she'll go to jail?" she asked, sipping her tea. "I don't know," I said, "but she never hurt another neighbor again." Alina smiled. "Good, because in the end, this wasn't just about a driveway or a fine. It was about standing up to a bully with too much power and no accountability. And we weren't victims anymore. We were the ones who turned the tide. And the HOA, well, now it belongs to all of us again." Miller had always been too influential in the neighborhood. Karen knew it. Her real aim was never justice or safety, it was control. She wanted power, and that meant eliminating anyone who might challenge her. She wasn't just trying to make us uncomfortable, she was launching a campaign of fear and manipulation to make us look like villains. Sam had overheard her plotting, and what he heard made my blood run cold. Karen was planning to destroy our lives, not just socially, but professionally. She wasn't just threatening our peace in the neighborhood. She was going after our entire future. She was talking about calling media outlets, using her connections, and contacting state agencies to accuse us of being frauds. If the wrong people believed her, it wouldn't matter that the accusations were false. Our careers would be ruined. That night, I watched from my bedroom window as Karen stood on her porch, glued to her phone, making call after call late into the night. She wasn't stopping. If anything, discovering I really was a federal agent only made her more determined. This wasn't a petty grudge anymore, it was a war she'd been waiting years to fight. She had the experience, the network, and now the spotlight. She'd spent decades building the kind of influence that could turn neighbors into enemies with just a whisper. Frank was watching too. He saw her start a live stream, and the crowd of neighbors gathering around her. They all had their phones out. It wasn't just the police she wanted, it was the show. She wanted to shame us publicly, drag us through the mud in front of the entire community. John walked up to Frank, asking if he was ready. Frank didn't even blink. "Son," he said, "the question isn't if I'm ready. It's if Linda Ross has any idea what she just started." The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages and missed calls. Karen had moved fast. This wasn't just online gossip anymore. She had taken her accusations to the local news. Apparently, the idea of fake federal agents threatening HOA leaders was exactly the kind of juicy headline the media wanted. A reporter was already scheduled to interview her that afternoon. According to the email chain that was quietly forwarded to me by a friendly neighbor at the station, Karen had pitched her story as a matter of public trust. When the interview aired, it was like watching a performance. She wore modest clothing, spoke in careful, practiced tones, and presented herself as nothing more than a concerned citizen protecting her community. "If they'll lie about being FBI," she said, "what else will they lie about?" The reporter nodded along, like Karen had just delivered the secret to world peace. There was no mention of her past crimes, no background, no critical questioning, just a perfectly crafted narrative that painted us as the enemy. Social media exploded. Some people praised her for standing up to corruption. Others weren't convinced, asking why federal agents would care about HOA rules or lawn height. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The neighborhood was dividing Team Karen versus Team Millerand. People who had shared barbecues and birthdays were now looking at each other with suspicion. Betty called me that evening. She was shaken. "John, I've lived here 8 years. Karen's always been pushy, but this is different. It feels targeted." She was right, of course, but I couldn't explain everything to her. "We never wanted to bring this drama," I told her. "We just wanted to live in peace." She sighed. Some people believe her. John. Tom from down the street actually asked if you were dangerous. Tom. The guy who borrowed your jumper cables. By Wednesday, Karen had taken things further. She hosted a community meeting at Betty's house. It felt like a scene out of a political thriller. Neighbors, sitting on opposite sides of the room, tension thick in the air. Karen stood at the front with a slideshow and piles of printed evidence. She had graphs, photos, and timelines of my comings and goings. She even pulled records from the county showing I didn't have a business license. She used it all to make me look like a criminal living under a fake identity. She spoke like a prosecutor. Calm, confident, rehearsed. "The Miller family is using fake government credentials," she claimed. "They're manipulating this community and avoiding accountability." She flipped through her slides. Inconsistent schedules, high expenses, evasive behavior. Then, she dropped her bombshell. "I've contacted federal authorities. If John Miller is really an agent, they'll confirm it. If not," she didn't have to finish the sentence. The room filled with murmurs. Betty tried to calm things down. "Maybe we should wait for official confirmation before we make serious accusations," she said gently, but Karen shut her down fast. "That's how criminals win, by counting on good people to hesitate." She turned to the group. "How many of you have had doubts but stayed quiet?" Slowly, hands went up. Karen smiled, like she had just proven a point. "That's how corruption spreads," she said, through silence. Meanwhile, Sam had become our best source of information. He had overheard Karen on the phone while playing in the yard. She said this needs to be a national example, he told me. She wants law enforcement to see what kind of people the FBI hires. That hit hard. She wasn't trying to win a petty fight anymore. She wanted to destroy our reputations, our jobs, our family. She was aiming for total ruin. False allegations like these could trigger long federal investigations. Security clearances could be suspended, careers could be ended. Even if we proved our innocence, the damage would already be done. That night, I found my dad in his study, flipping through an old case file. It was the one from Linda Ross' conviction, 25 years of paperwork about her fraud, trial, and sentencing. She said she'd make me pay, he whispered. I thought, prison would change her, make her see she was wrong. But she's spent all this time planning revenge. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like defeat. Maybe we should just leave, he said. Let her have her victory. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad, if we run now, we're just telling her she can get away with this. What's to stop her from doing it again? To someone else? No, we're staying. Just then, we heard noise outside. A small crowd had gathered on Corin's porch. She was holding up her phone again, live streaming. Her voice carried across the lawn. Tomorrow morning, she said, we'll finally get answers about who's really living on this street. Justice is coming to Maple Street. And then Officer Davis arrived. He looked at Frank's ID, squinting at the badge, expression shifting as he realized something. Sir, he said carefully, I need to make a phone call. Karen saw his reaction and quickly reached for his arm, but it was already too late. You said. She gripped the officer's sleeve like she owned the badge on his chest. There's no need for a call. You have everything you need right here, she insisted, pointing to the stack of papers she had assembled, most of it pure speculation. But Davis gently pulled his arm away and stepped aside, walking a few feet down the driveway while raising his radio to his mouth. The way his posture changed, the way his voice dropped, it was clear he'd seen something in Frank's credentials that Karen hadn't expected. Karen stood frozen for a moment, processing what was happening. Her expression tightened, lips pressed thin, and she looked toward the crowd. A few neighbors lowered their phones, unsure now. The air around us shifted. For weeks she'd been in control, controlling the narrative, the optics, the emotions, but now, with one glance from a uniformed officer, that control was slipping. Davis returned a moment later, his eyes on Frank. Sir, I've just spoken to Washington. Your credentials are valid. Everything checks out. The silence that followed was deafening. For once, Karen had no words. Frank didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice or call attention to the win. He simply nodded and said, Thank you, officer. I appreciate your diligence. That quiet confidence said more than any speech ever could. But Karen wasn't done. You could see the way her eyes darted, still scanning for a lifeline, still searching for an angle. Even if his ID is real, she said, voice cracking just slightly, that doesn't explain the other suspicious behavior. The meetings, the surveillance vehicles, the unusual hours, there's something going on here. Her voice trembled, on the edge of desperation now. It wasn't about community safety anymore, it was about saving her version of reality. Davis gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head. Ma'am, I'd advise you to stop making public claims without evidence. You're on the edge of interfering with an active investigation. The words hit like a thunderclap. Everyone standing on her lawn suddenly realized this wasn't about overgrown grass or HOA rules. This was bigger. And Karen had just crossed a line she didn't understand. The crowd began to disperse quietly. A few neighbors murmured to each other, throwing uncertain glances back at her. Some looked embarrassed to have believed her. Others looked angry, not at us, but at Karen. The mood had shifted. Not because of any speech or retaliation, but because the truth had begun to crack through the shell of fear and manipulation she'd built. That night, for the first time in weeks, the house felt still. We weren't celebrating, but we weren't afraid either. It was a moment to breathe. Sam asked if Karen was going to jail. Frank shook his head. Not yet, he said. But her power's broken. And that was true. Without the neighborhood's trust, Karen's influence evaporated like mist. The spotlight she'd tried to turn on us was now turned on her. Her past, her lies, her obsession, none of it could stay hidden forever. In the following days, the news cycle moved on. The local station issued a quiet correction, citing unverified sources and misunderstood credentials. Karen stopped appearing in public. Her porch sat empty. The live streams vanished. Neighbors began to stop by again. Small apologies. Awkward laughs. Didn't know what to believe. We didn't hold it against them. That's what fear does. It clouds judgment. But slowly, the fear was lifting. Frank finally closed the case file he'd kept open on his desk. She wanted revenge, he said. But she gave us something else: clarity. Now we know who we're dealing with. Now we know how to fight. And we weren't going anywhere. Didn't let him fool you with fake papers. But Frank's next words froze everyone. Officer, before you make that call, you should know this woman's real name isn't Karen Walsh. What she did 25 years ago is about to catch up with her. The morning Karen had spent decades planning had finally arrived. By 8 a.m., she was already outside, dressed in full makeup and her best outfit, ready to throw what could only be described as a viewing party. She had orchestrated a public spectacle meant to humiliate us. Believing the police were coming to arrest our family, she had gathered 15 neighbors with their phones out, hoping to record a viral moment. Betty looked uncomfortable, and Tom from down the street even brought a folding chair. Someone had coffee and pastries like it was a community picnic. Inside our house, the mood was completely different. Dad was calm and focused, carefully laying out his FBI retirement credentials, his service record, pension documents and commendations. Sam, though nervous, tried to stay composed, asking if he could watch everything from the window. I reviewed my own federal ID, making sure it was clear and up to date. We all knew this moment would come ever since Karen had recognized Dad, but that didn't make it any easier, seeing our neighbors outside, eagerly waiting like it was a parade. When Officer Davis arrived with 2 additional patrol cars, Karen had described us as potentially dangerous individuals. The crowd applauded as if the show had begun. I watched from the window as Karen approached the officers with a thick folder, and that smug smile she had practiced. She handed over her so-called evidence: social media posts, photos, and what she called witness statements from other neighbors. Davis took the folder but remained neutral, as good officers do in community disputes. "Ma'am, these are serious allegations," he said. "Federal impersonation is a serious crime. If these individuals are indeed threatening people, we'll address it." But I could tell by his face that he realized this wasn't going to be a routine check. He noticed the phones recording from every angle. Karen, oblivious to his caution, pointed proudly toward our house. That's when Dad made a decision that changed everything. He didn't wait for them to knock. He walked outside, wearing khakis and a polo shirt, looking every bit the retired agent he was. The crowd went quiet as he handed his credentials to Officer Davis and spoke calmly. "Good morning, officer. I understand there's been some confusion about my background." Davis read the documents carefully. His face changed. "Victor Frank Miller, Senior Special Agent, FBI Financial Crimes Division, retired with full honors." His tone shifted with recognition. "The Frank Miller. The closer, sir. Your cases are studied at the academy." A murmur ran through the crowd. Phones caught every word. Karen's confident grin started to fade. But she wasn't done. "Those papers could be faked," she shouted. "Anyone can print those. Don't be fooled." Her voice cracked as the situation slipped from her control. That's when I stepped outside. I held my own federal ID. "Officer Davis, Agent John Miller, FBI Financial Crimes Division, currently active." I presented my credentials and badge, staying composed like I'd been trained. Davis took them and examined every detail. Badge number 4472. Direct Supervisor, Agent Helen Collins, Quantico Field Office. He looked at me with respect. "Agent Miller, sir, this is unexpected." Then he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you're telling us that federal agents are impersonating federal agents." The absurdity of it all started to sink in. Neighbors looked at each other, realizing they'd been manipulated. That's when Dad dropped the final bombshell. "Officer Davis, this woman's real name is Linda Ross. 25 years ago, I investigated her for laundering $2 million from children's medical research charities." Silence fell. You could hear birds chirping. Nobody spoke. Dad's voice was firm and steady. "Kids didn't get life-saving treatments because she stole their research money. She was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison." Linda Karenna let out a terrible sound, half rage, half pain. 15 years. You destroyed everything I built. I spent every day in that prison planning this," she screamed, losing control. "I researched you. I found your family. I moved here, just to make you suffer like I suffered. Neighbors slowly stepped away from her, finally seeing the truth. Davis was already calling it in. Ma'am, Linda Ross, you're under arrest for harassment of federal officers, filing false police reports, and violating federal parole. Still, she didn't stop. As he read her rights, she kept shouting things that made the crowd shiver. You think you won? I chose this house. I planned everything. I made you trust me. Made you elect me. You were all just weapons I used to destroy him. The crowd dispersed. Embarrassment and fear on every face. Betty walked up to Dad in tears. Frank, I'm so sorry, we didn't know. Others came too, apologizing, shaken by how they'd been used. Sam joined Dad as Linda was cuffed and put in the patrol car. But she wasn't done. You think this ends here, Frank? You think 25 years of planning stops with handcuffs? She lowered her voice, but somehow everyone still heard her. Did you ever wonder why I chose this neighborhood? This exact house next to yours? Dad's expression changed for the first time. What are you talking about, Linda? The patrol car pulled away, Linda still smiling through the window. And we were left standing there, unsure if it was truly over. Her confidence, even in defeat, made us uneasy. It felt like there were deeper plans we hadn't uncovered. Layers we hadn't peeled back. Dad looked at our home like he was seeing it for the first time, unsure what she meant. The arrest should have been closure, but instead, it felt like the beginning of something even more dangerous. Neighbors who had been ready to film our downfall were now offering apologies. Betty cried openly. Frank, I feel like such a fool. That woman used us like pieces in a sick game. Tom, the guy with the folding chair, looked too ashamed to speak. Watch the drama unfold. Quietly folded it up and walked away without saying a word. Others followed suit, heads low, avoiding eye contact, ashamed of how easily they'd been swept up in Linda's performance. Inside the house, the mood shifted from tense to reflective. Sam asked Dad if we were finally safe now, if it was really over. Dad didn't answer right away. He looked out the window where Linda had just been taken away, then turned to us and said, Not yet. Not until I understand why she chose this neighborhood. There's something we're missing. I could feel it, too, that unsettling weight in the air, like the storm hadn't actually passed but had only paused. Linda's final words echoed in my mind, raising more questions than they answered. Why this house? Why now? What else had she done in the years she lived next door, playing the perfect neighbor? The committed HOA president, the friendly face everyone trusted. Dad immediately began reviewing everything he could remember about Linda's behavior over the past year, who she'd spoken to, what projects she'd championed, which committees she'd pushed through. We realized she'd had access to every personal detail the HOA managed: resident profiles, property records, even background checks for new buyers. That kind of information in the wrong hands could be dangerous. I called Agent Collins at Quantico. She promised to start a full background sweep on Linda Ross Elias's property records, financial activity. Meanwhile, Dad started pulling out boxes of his old case files. If Linda had help, if there were others tied to her former operation, they might still be embedded somewhere in the neighborhood or surrounding community. That night, none of us slept. The quiet of the house felt heavy, like we were holding our breath. We'd uncovered a hidden enemy who'd been smiling at us for years, baking cookies, organizing block parties, and slowly weaving her influence through every thread of our neighborhood. But now that her mask had fallen, what we saw beneath it wasn't just anger, it was obsession. And obsession leaves traces. The next morning, Dad found something. A small box Linda had left in the HOA storage closet, supposedly for meeting supplies. Inside were copies of surveillance photos of our family. Us at the grocery store, Sam playing in the front yard, even pictures taken through our windows. It wasn't just about revenge. She had been monitoring us, collecting data, planning. There was a map to our neighborhood with certain houses marked in red. One of them was the home of Mr. Geller, the HOA treasurer. Another was the vacant property 2 doors down that had been purchased recently through a shell corporation. And the last marked house was ours. I brought the evidence to the local field office. Within hours, federal investigators were dispatched to quietly question Mr. Geller. Turns out he had unknowingly been laundering money through HOA renovation budgets. Linda had manipulated him into approving inflated contracts with shell companies she secretly controlled. As for the vacant house, it was wired with surveillance gear cameras, mics, and encrypted Wi-Fi that had been piggybacking off neighboring networks. This wasn't just a revenge plot. It was a full-blown operation. And it had been active for over a year, hidden beneath layers of HOA paperwork and community goodwill. Linda Ross had turned our peaceful neighborhood into a cover for something far bigger. And even though she was behind bars again, we knew this was only the beginning. Because someone with that much patience, with the ability to reinvent herself, completely and manipulate an entire community, doesn't act alone and doesn't plan for just one outcome. As we stood together in the living room, staring at the evidence spread across the coffee table, Dad said something I'll never forget. She didn't just pick this house to torment me. She picked it because it gave her access. And that means someone else might already be in place, waiting to pick up where she left off. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were targets. And the neighborhood we thought we knew had become the front line of a war we didn't see coming. The officer, who had just arrested Linda, looked completely stunned. She had us convinced you were the problem. How did we not see what she really was? It was heartbreaking to see good people come to terms with how deeply they'd been manipulated. But it was also moving to see how fast the neighborhood began to rally together once the truth came out. My dad, with his decades of experience in public service, stepped up with the calm and patience he was known for. He gathered everyone on our front lawn like it was an impromptu town hall. Linda Ross is extremely skilled at what she does, he began. She spent 15 years in prison studying how to manipulate communities like ours. He explained how she had once embezzled $2 million from medical charities for children. Lives had been lost because potential treatments were never developed due to the missing funds. As that reality settled in, the horror on everyone's faces became painfully real. This wasn't just about money. It was about hope being stolen from families fighting to save their kids. As news of Linda's arrest spread through federal channels, the scope of her crimes came into focus. She'd been running HOA scams in at least 4 different states. Elderly residents and trusting families were her primary targets. 52 families had been defrauded of a total of $890,000. Siphoned away through fake improvement projects and bloated contractor invoices. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division, which included my own department, began working across field offices to track her down and try to recover what they could. Still, the emotional damage to our own neighborhood was something that couldn't be measured in dollars. Betty organized a gathering she called a healing meeting at the community center. She invited anyone affected by Linda's attacks on our family. 23 neighbors showed up, and what they shared shocked us all. She asked about your schedule every time we talked, one person admitted. I thought she was just being friendly. She offered to reduce my HOA fees if I kept an eye on your house, said another. Then came the worst of it. Mrs. Henderson, who lived just 2 streets over, told everyone. She convinced me to give her access to my bank account, said it was for automatic payments. I had no idea she'd been stealing from me for months. Linda had used her position as HOA president not just to collect power, but to build a web of manipulation and theft. She knew exactly how to exploit trust. She had everyone fooled for a while, and when it all unraveled, the betrayal left people stunned and angry, not just at Linda, but at themselves for not seeing it sooner. In the middle of it all, Sam became a bit of a local hero. My 12-year-old son had shown more courage and clarity than most adults. Agent Sam helped us gather the crucial evidence, Dad said with a proud smile during the gathering. Sam beamed as parents nodded in admiration. Some even asked him to speak to their kids about recognizing the warning signs of manipulation. Sam took it seriously. 3 months later, Linda Ross was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The charges included multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, harassment of federal officers, and violating her parole. The judge said that her deliberate manipulation of an entire community for personal revenge showed a level of premeditation that deserved the harshest punishment. Nearly all of the $890,000 was recovered and returned to the victims. Her 3 known accomplices were sentenced to between 5 and 12 years each. Betty was elected as the new HOA president, this time with full community support. One of her first decisions was to overhaul the way the HOA operated. She got rid of the fines and enforcement policies Linda had used to control and intimidate residents. The focus shifted to actual community improvement, cleaning up common areas, helping neighbors with maintenance, building trust instead of fear. The difference was immediate. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood lifted, and people started genuinely connecting again. My dad found new meaning in his retirement. He began offering security consultations to other communities, helping them understand how to spot and stop the kind of schemes Linda had used. Financial predators don't just chase money, he told one group. They chase trust. They hide behind our desire to believe the best about the people around us. His advice spread far beyond law enforcement. Community groups, local churches, and even neighborhood Facebook pages began quoting his insights. He was helping ordinary people become more vigilant without becoming paranoid. 6 months after Linda's arrest, everything felt different, better, stronger. Neighbors who once barely nodded at each other were now real friends. They built a community garden together, an idea Dad had always wanted to bring to life. Sam was doing well, thriving in ways that showed how much he'd grown through the ordeal. He had learned lessons that most kids wouldn't face until adulthood about courage, doing what's right, and the importance of speaking up. And then everything shifted again. I was at work when my phone rang. It was Dad. His voice was steady, but something in his tone made my stomach drop. "John, I need you to come home. Now we got something in the mail. You have to see it yourself." When I arrived, he was at the kitchen table, staring at a letter. The envelope was from the Federal Correctional Institution. The paper inside was short, but the words hit like a punch. The neighborhood was never random. Frank, check your basement. Some games take longer to finish than others.